Hi everyone, this is Craig Zelzer from PCDN, based in Medellin, Colombia, here for episode 10, season 10, episode 17 of our Social Change Career podcast. Today, we're delighted to be with Andrea Orrego, who is a sustainability professional, architect, co-founder, innovator, and many other things. Currently, she's based in Colorado, so we're just talking about the beautiful mountains. For people who have not joined us before on the podcast, usually this goes about 55 minutes. We love to bring in audience participation. So please, whether you're watching this now or join a little bit later, let us know where you're watching from. You can put that in the comments, particularly on LinkedIn, just what country or city you're based in, maybe a sentence about your background, and also feel free to ask questions and make comments throughout the episode. This is a live stream, and then in about 3 to 4 weeks, it'll be converted to one of our episodes of our Social Change Career podcast, which you can find on PCDN Global or any one of the major podcasting platforms. And 2 quick requests. If you take a minute now to watch live or listen later, if you like the podcast, please rate it. It takes 30 seconds on whatever platform, Spotify, Apple, Google, Podcast Addict. Just give us a rating, or whatever podcast you like, whether it's this one or others, because this is a labor of love and it just helps us all grow our impact. Just welcome a few people. Sabira, welcome. Let us know where you're watching from. Roana, welcome from Germany. Someone from Egypt. So great to have people from all over. I will summarize Andrea's bio and then we'll just jump right into it. She's a 3rd generation architect. So we'll have to find out if there's a record beyond that, or any 5th to 6th or 7th generation architects, and founder of the Atelier App. I should say, in full transparency, Catalina and I are very small angel investors in Atelier, and I love what they're doing. She was born and raised in Lima, Peru, which has some of the best food in Latin America, and moved to Aspen, Colorado in 2014. In Aspen, she's worked in all kinds of architectural design, in Colorado and beyond, and also in Latin America. And she really, from her own experience, realized there's a significant need to help build an app and a product and a system to help people either building houses from scratch or renovating, to factor in sustainability from day one. So not just kind of make it an afterthought. So she has a lot of experience in design and interior design and architecture. This led to the Atelier App, a home design visualizer and marketplace for eco-friendly brands. She is also a Latitude Fellow, which is if you are interested in Latin America and startups, it's one of the leading networks and does wonderful work. She's a Visible Hands Fellow, which does a lot on trying to increase, let's say, representation equity among founders and investors. She's also a Ghana's Ventures partner, which I am too. So if you don't follow Lolita Taub, she's one of the leading investors in all things Latin America. And she's also currently in an accelerator. And so delighted to have you joining us today. Thank you, Andrea, for taking time out of your schedule and sharing some of your wisdom with us. And I'll just welcome a few more people and then we'll get into the questions. Welcome Ibrahim from Somalia. Welcome Francis from Zimbabwe. Welcome Tobago from Botswana. Welcome Dr. Shaikh from Bangladesh. Welcome Mohammed from Somalia. And welcome Patrick from Ottawa. So again, for people watching, feel free to put a sentence or 2 about your background, and at any time put in questions or comments. And wonderful to have so many people. We have very strong from Southern Africa and the MENA region today, but it'd be great to see also if we have people from Latin America. So Andrea, can you talk a little bit about what type of change have you been focused on throughout your career?
Yeah, thank you for that introduction. It's always interesting to hear someone else talking about my accomplishments, and it's awesome. I think change in general has been pretty much a motivator in my career all along from the beginning. I came into architecture, like you mentioned, from a family of architects and designers and people that have been in the industry for 2 generations prior to me, and then I myself became an architect. My cousin became an architect. 2 of my cousins became an architect. So it was just a lot of people in the industry. And when I decided to enter the field, it was more about the drive of creation. And I've always been in love with design. I've always been in love with creation in general. So that's what drove me to get into architecture to begin with. As I started, developing my career, it like in the early days when I was still in architecture school, going to architecture school in Peru, coming from like a background of my family name being recognized, it it represented a challenge from the beginning, because like some people, like some professors would see me as like, hey, you're gonna have it easy, like we're like, you've already been in the industry, like you have the contacts with your network, so like we're gonna be harder on you, or whatever that was. And some other professors were like, actually, oh, are you gonna like live up to your family name? And like from both perspectives, it's always been a little bit hard. um but I like the challenge. So I'm like, well, I need to like create a name for myself. And that's really what drove me to continue in this career, and trying to like make something out of it. Then I married into American culture and ended up moving to the States. And I got a job here in Aspen when I was able to start working, because the immigration process is a whole nother challenge on its own. Um, and it just happened that the job that I got was in an area, well, Aspen is an area that's known for, second homes and, the ski resort life. So every time there's, a new acquisition in terms of like someone buying a house, it goes straight into home remodeling. And, there's a really active real estate movement here. So there's a lot of home remodeling going on. So there's always a lot of like demand in terms of professionals that can just like get into that. So I ended up specializing in, home design, home remodel, just residential design in general, out of practice of like having to do that multiple times, like seeing multiple projects in a year. And, like it faced me with this, like just reality of like, if these homes that are get like let's say the use of the home itself is, very short in comparison to like someone living in there full term, like during the year. And, like someone owns this property for like, let's say 5 years, and then in 5 years it's going to go through another remodel and another remodel and another remodel. What's the impact of that in our, environment? And that was like the first eye-opening like experience that I had in terms of like the work that I was doing. And as fun as it was to be able to work with, huge budgets, because these are like multi-million dollar homes, I like, there's still like the typical constrictions of, what the municipality lets you do, like permit wise. Also, because this is like such an intensive remodeling kind of like area and industry, like local municipalities have a lot of, let's say, I'm gonna say roadblocks to like try to like mitigate that. And that was very interesting. But then there was this other side of the coin of like, what happens to like the smaller budget projects. So like on one end, in the professional life, I was seeing, big clients going through these big transformation with like multi-million dollar budgets. And at the same time, like my personal friends were starting families, or, like just getting started. They, for the first time, had some, needs of like furnishing their homes, and they didn't know like where to start. Like myself, even when I moved here, like I'm like, oh, where do I even start like buying furniture for the apartment that I have to get so that I can live here? And what's publicized is like Amazon, Wayfair, all these like big box online retailers. And then you get what fits your budget. It comes in a box, you put it together, and you realize this is really cheaply made quality stuff. How long is this going to last? Sometimes, like even putting together, the pieces, the wood was like so low quality that it would break just like trying to assemble it. And these like pieces have a lifetime of like maybe 18 months if you're lucky. So then there's another, side of the equation of like all these things that we use, all these materials, products that are more accessible for like the lower end budgets, end up in landfills. They're made with really, cheaply or cheap and toxic even processes sometimes. So like, what am I doing as a professional to help, or like, contribute even to the problem, or to help mitigate it? So that's when like things started clicking into place.
Wonderful. Thanks for sharing this story. And kind of a related question. One is just, my wife Catalina, we worked together, and when she first saw snow, I mean, she had hiked in the glaciers in Colombia, but the first time she saw snow in the U.S., she woke me up like at 4 a.m. She's like, "There's snow." I'm like, "Yeah, I know," because I grew up around snow. But obviously moving from Lima to Aspen is quite a different change.
Yeah.
But one question, we've done some investments in the sustainable fashion. I have friends working on sustainable fashion. Some have their own startups, and it's estimated about 10% of all global emissions are connected to fast fashion. And there's a lot of bad, both in terms of worker rights, but also just environmental impact.
Yeah.
Is there any data that you have or have found, or just places you go to say, I mean, there's architecture in terms of design and building, but there's remodeling, and there's also kind of furnishing. So do you have any favorite data points on any aspects of those in terms of the environmental impact or the trash impact?
Yeah, that's a great question. So in terms of, let's say, greenhouse gas emissions, construction in general represents about 30% of the emissions worldwide. So when you start like factoring the different elements that add to that, bigger scope, furnishings in general represent about 30% of that 30%. So that is a really big number when you think about the scale of this problem. In the US alone, 12 million tons of furniture get dumped in landfills per year. So that's huge. And, that's just looking at the US. If you look at other countries, maybe consumerism isn't, as impactful in other countries, but the life cycle of products is like catching up. So I would need to make sure that, when these trends end up in other countries that are still kind of early to them, we could stop them before they get to the scale that they've gotten into in the States. Yeah.
And is there any kind of, I mean, there's a lot going on in sustainability across sectors. Some of it's just pure greenwashing, but some of it really is trying to do triple bottom line.
Right.
This shows my lack of knowledge about kind of design and construction, but is there like a official seal of a either industry certified or government regulated that you can trust that this manufacturer is thinking about end-to-end life cycle and also worker rights? Or is it more the consumer has to like search it out and go beyond greenwashing? And this could be specific to the US or in general.
Yeah. It's usually more in the hands of the consumer. Instead, in terms of like seals, there's like this one certification that's called the Green Guard, and it's usually for fabrics alone. So if you're like looking at upholstery in terms of furniture, then yes, it's part of that that effort. And there are like the interesting part about furnishings is that there are not a lot of like standards out there that you can meet per se. But what I like to focus on is the intention behind the manufacturing process. So like you might not get, your like golden sticker star on your forehead for for doing certain things, but there are brands that really have the intention of helping in any way they can. So like let's say the process of getting certified by, third party might be too expensive for some like smaller brands that are doing the things right from the beginning. But and that's what we want to like help, right? So these smaller brands, some of them like work with communities in a specific area of, let's say, in the Amazon. And they make sure that the type of tree that they're harvesting is a tree that will like grow fast, that they're like doing the processes right, that they're helping the community that is helping, with the lumber process and bringing jobs to that community, making sure everything's fair trade. Those type of efforts like really speak to me more than just like a big corporation getting a stamp to make sure that, hey, we're meeting these criteria. So like, hey, trust in me and let's do this together. I think that's very valuable. I think like if you have the capacity and the scale to do that, that's awesome. And you should continue to do those kind of things. But the intention behind the process really I feel is what's going to drive the difference, especially with younger generations right now, like Gen Zers and millennials. We are not easily fooled. We're very political in nature for some reason, and we like, supporting those that we feel are truthful in what they're doing and what they're like contributing. We I don't want to generalize, but like friends of mine that have worked in the industry with me, I know are looking for those type of things. Like they want to see support to smaller communities, to smaller brands, to improving the economy in general, and not just having like all the responsibility of it placed on huge corporations or governments or like these outside figures that might not really you know change things in the way that we want to see change happen.
Wonderful. So questions are starting to come in, so I'll ask just two more quick ones, then we'll start bringing them in. And welcome, Allison. So can you talk a little bit how in the world did you transition from third generation architect, both in Peru and then working in the US? And you've talked about seeing the challenge, but how did that lead you to taking the decision to build a startup?
Yeah.
And then a little bit like the problem that Atelier is trying to address in terms of, and where it is right now. And then what is your advice for other people who are either crazy enough or risk takers, like around the good and the bad of building a startup?
Yeah. So I hope my answer is not underwhelming because I didn't really plan to make this transition. It kind of just like happened for me. Um, I I went to school in Peru. I had, let's say, my life plan to like become an architect and have my own firm at some point and like create some type of impact with my design and my work. But then I got married and ended up having to move to a different country. So when I moved here, I was just like trying to get a job to begin my life essentially. Like the architectural work that I have done was still in a junior level in Peru before I moved here. So when I moved here, I had to start all over, especially because everything that I had learned in architecture school didn't quite apply the same way here in the States. So in the States, like construction systems are completely different. Building codes are different. Every, permit process is different within each municipality in each like town or city or wherever you're working. So there was a lot of learning. Even like going from the metric system to the imperial system was a huge like brain scramble for me. And it took me a long time. So I was just like focused on trying to learn as fast as I could. And in the time in between me being able to start, working for someone and like because like I had this like year and a half gap in which my work permit and all of my immigration documents were being processed, I couldn't really, like support myself. And that was probably one of like the, let's say, lowest points in my like self-worth type of like, journey, because I felt really helpless. I felt like I had to depend 100% on my husband at that point. He wasn't doing great in terms of like, like everything we could afford and all of that. So there were really, real limitations. And I used that time as an opportunity to figure out what I could do in the meantime. And I started doing like online classes, webinars, whatever it was, to see like if I could have some type of like online business on the side to help get things going. So in between that time, I learned, like social media marketing. I learned how to put together an e-commerce store. I learned to use all of the no-code tools to just have like an online business. And I had set it up to the point that I had a candle shop, I had a blog, I had like all the things going on. I had a little bit of a Instagram following at that point. Back then, Instagram was still like chronicle in terms of like the post. You would just see whatever was posted that moment. So I had a little bit of a of like an advantage in terms of engagement and trying to build a little bit of an audience. And that's as far as I got before I was able to start working for someone else. So in the process of working for someone else, I had a great mentor, my first boss. He just taught me pretty much everything. And I just knew like, hey, I already have all these tools that I've learned. What if I had this thing on the side as a passive source of income? And I didn't know what it was going to be. I just like let it mature. And the more I interacted with clients, the more I came across the problem of them not knowing how to put together what they grab from house or from Pinterest or whatever into their own spaces. So let's say the challenges that I started identifying were lack of visualization, not knowing where to source things. A lot of my clients weren't working even with like interior designers because they really enjoyed the shopping process themselves. So then me as their project manager, which has spent hours creating 3D models with all of the different things that they started finding online, and then finding, like, okay, so this reference photo that you liked, where can we source those pieces of furniture from? Where can we get these curtains from? And just like discovering this whole world. And the more I did that for my clients, the more I realized that this is really, a burdensome process because all the pieces are scattered. But if things were like streamlined and, curated, and I had a interface that was easy enough to use that anybody could just like tap in there and start designing and putting together their things, then I wouldn't need to do that for them. And they could like go through that iteration process multiple times, come to me with a, end result, and then I can make it happen. So that was my starting point, and I had no idea how to build it. Like I wasn't intact. I didn't have anybody in the industry to ask. So started posting ads on Craigslist, asking for people to come show me how to do these things. I ended up finding an affinity group in the community where I live of a lot of technologists that have moved here because they were able to work remotely. And I just like started getting inundated with information from every source that I could find. And it just got to a point that I had a clear vision of what the product needed to be, of what I wanted to do. Serendipity happened. A good friend of mine introduced me to my developer, who ended up becoming my co-founder. And we just started going at it.
Very cool. So thank you. And please check out Atelier. So one question comes from Tabogo, who's, I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly, from Botswana. She's currently working on a waste management app prototype for sustainable development in Botswana. Do you have any advice for bringing an app to market? So maybe both in general for other people where their product or service might be connected to an app, and also just a little bit, how did you get from, like, you found your co-founder who sounds like he has, or they have technical skills.
Yeah.
So how did you go from like this vision to actually creating something like a minimum, MVP, minimum viable prototype, to actually launching it? And then also, so both your advice for Tabogo, but also your own reflections.
Yeah, Tabogo, could you tell me if your app is for consumers or for corporations or industry? Because maybe I can tailor my answer to that. But in general terms, this process is really not easy, and I had to learn the wrong way or the hard way, that it's very important that you start testing your ideas before you even have like a solution that you want to build that's specific to something. So start with a problem, get involved and enveloped in the problem itself, that the solution can look like anything. You just want to figure out this problem. So if, let's say the problem itself is how to make sure that consumers can easily manage their waste in, day-to-day life, like get really in the weeds of like asking if you can interview 100 people and ask them step by step, like, what are you doing right now about it? What's frustrating about it? Like, what even made you think that this was a necessity for you? And get into all of those like previous to, let's say, bringing a solution answers. That's going to help you a lot. And then based on that data and that information, you can even start creating traction before you even have a product that's defined. So let's say if your customers tell you, like, I just like don't even know who to call, then maybe you put together a list of resources for them and see if they would pay for that list of resources. So start testing like these little things, and based on those experiments and the results that you get from that, then you can put together the solution. So let's say I have like, 90% of my customers doing this thing, and we could do it easier this other way. And we know that this works because we have, 20 people already trying this with, a $2 subscription that we have, or whatever it is that you're putting together, then that will help you product. And now we're, in the renaissance of technology, in which nobody really needs to know how to code to put together a product anymore. So you can even build an app from scratch with no code tools, using tools like Wix or Bubble or all of these things. And with that alone, you can create a solid enough MVP that you don't even need to hire, let's say, a developer up until that point. But if you're going to go after VC funding, then it's really important that you do bring the team aspect to it from, as soon as possible, because it's better if you have more brains involved in the, development of the solution. And also because at the very early stages, the funding goes towards the team more than towards the actual solution, because they know that the solution is going to continue to evolve. So that's my recommendation.
Wonderful. And Debogo, feel free to, if you're still watching, feel free to add some more details. So one question, so it sounds like you're basically saying fall in love with the problem, not the solution. And then, if you fall in love with the problem and often what happens with founders is they experience the problem themselves, or the challenge, or the frustration. And, they find that pain point that, and they also know others are experiencing that. And then they dive into it and be like, here, like, not saying here's the solution, but like, what's going on here? What are the existing solutions? So can you just talk a little bit more, in terms of your own experience? So actually, so Debogo just wrote some more, so let me get back to that, and then I'll continue. The main problems the app will solve are to bring awareness to people of Botswana on how and when they can dispose of their waste properly. Also to give the citizens the ability to report waste that is not disposed of properly, which is a huge issue in many countries. And she also wants to work with local recycling centers and hopefully local government.
Yeah. I think that's a great problem to tackle, and you might not even need an app yet to prove that you can build a solution for that. So if the solution you're looking at is bringing awareness, you can even do that with a newsletter. You can do that with a podcast. You can do that with some kind of, like, let's say, media. And based on like community that you build around that first initial, value proposition that you're given, then you can start thinking about your product in terms of an app. So once you have the community built around it and you bring them all into an app, then the app is going to work, because you can spend, thousands of dollars building this app in like like the solution that you thought was going to work out, but then you don't have the people behind it, and you're going to have to continue to spend money to reiterate on this product for a long time before it actually catches on.
Okay, thank you so much. So just going back to the question we were discussing, can you talk a little bit more? So you found the pain point and frustration, and then did you do 100 user interviews, or 50 or 300? And then any tools that you use that you found help, whether it's like, transcription tools, or just use notebooks? And then how did you go from that, deciding like on the functions or what would happen within Atelier, and why is it, why is it app-based? Why, like, how did you get to that point? And then how did you actually pre-launch it, and where is it at now in terms of users or market?
Yeah. I wish I would have followed my own advice. I didn't know this information when I got started, so it took me a little bit longer. The good thing is that I didn't have any investment when I was like playing with this idea. So it just took me like my own time of figuring this out. And when I got started, I kind of like started converting that first, user set that I had from my candle shop back in the day, because it had sort of a similar alignment. It was still into like home design and like, like my brand's always been sort of like my philosophy. So it was a little easier to bring that crowd on board. And then I went into doing a lot of interviews. So like just to start out, I had like 300 interviews that I performed to just even understand what people do in terms of like how to get into a decoration project. So what drove them to want to start decorating? What are the places where they look for, like, what are their design affinities, like do you have a set design or do you just want cozy, like what are you going after? All those questions really illustrated the, let's say, the path for me. And back then there weren't as many no code tools as there are right now, so I knew that, if the problem I was going after was visualization, then I had to create a tool for that. So we created, my developer and I created a very, rudimentary version of what we have right now, and we started testing that out. It took us a little while to build it because we were, building it out of our pockets in our own time. We're both like working full time, so with that first prototype, we got our first advisors involved, we got our first like user base involved to like see what the product needed to become. Then COVID happened, so we used that time that of a break to, like, let's say, clean up that initial data from, because it wasn't even an MVP, it was like an alpha version at that point, and clean up that data, build a proper MVP from that. And in that in between time was that we found, it's like we pulled on this thread and we found the much bigger aspect of the problem, that was, if we're going to bring all of these like pieces of furniture, materials, everything for their home projects, who's going to provide them? And it's kind of like the light bulb went off and I'm like, hey, we want to make this, as ethical. That was my drive. I want to make this as ethical as possible. I wasn't using the term sustainability because I knew that if I labeled it as sustainable itself, I might just need to go with brands that were able to hit those like seals or stamps of approval from certain institutions. And I wanted to give a chance to, the artisans that are making one, beautiful table out of like maybe, let's say, beetle kill lumber, and they're not going to have time to promote it. So like, how do we bring these smaller brands on board? And we realized, hey, the market is actually huge for this, because we have tons of people on Etsy right now that have no idea how to market their Etsy stores or how to like get in front of consumers. We have I interviewed a few different boutique brands, and there was one in New York that said, you know, Wayfair would like me to open a store with them, but I don't want to, market my brand the same as the other products that they have there. So I usually just book or look for someone else that's bigger that will carry my line with them. And we started finding all of these different cases. Then we looked at Latin America, and just like everything exploded, because the market there is so fragmented that people don't even know where to get started if they're going to come furnish their house or start a remodel project. You will go to like maybe a department store to begin with, and then everybody ends up having the same couch, the same table, everything. And that's something that really appealed to my early customers, is like, I want unique pieces, I want to make sure that they're good quality, and I want the online transaction, which is still very tricky in Latin America, to feel trustworthy, to feel like it's something I can rely on when I'm going through this process. And that's when just everything started coming together, and we're able to put together the final product.
Wonderful. So Allison has a question, thanks to Allison, from YouTube. So about kind of, if we're thinking about sourcing of materials or final products, in terms of whether it's furniture or something else. So when you think about ethical,
Yeah.
in terms of how you helping people who are working on redesign,
Yeah.
the people facilitating design, and the people providing the products or materials or final furniture. I mean, one is the broader question, like if we're thinking about the climate impact, you estimated like 30% of climate impact comes from construction, and then a third of that can come from furniture. But both in your sourcing, how do you think about sustainability or ethical, in terms of like, because how do you know it's not just kind of mass produced, or they're throwing horrible chemicals? And then what are your thoughts in general just about, there's construction and then there's furnishing, like the net climate impact of just transporting things must be enormous.
Exactly. And that's exactly why we decided to go after like a local type of model. So if like we're going to get to the point that we're going to know, let's say, what happens to the product from when it was just a piece of lumber all the way until like the journey of it arriving as a chair for someone in their house. So like to get through that whole process, we want to know like who the brands are that we're working with. So we have a really intense curation process to begin with, and then we only show local brands within like a, you know, let's say enough radius that, you know, the transportation from, let's say, even the warehouse or the storefront or whatever the piece is located to the end consumer is as short as possible. And then we can grow in those like little, let's say, nodes around cities. So we'll always have like a radius limit, where, you know, you can source your pieces from, and within each brand know like how far the, you know, initial raw materials were being transported to become the end piece, and having all of that history be part of the story behind each piece. So what we really want to do is like create, let's say, a viral Instagram account to like give you some kind of like, you know, metaphor into it, of each piece of furniture. So when you're putting together your room, you can click on that, let's say, dining chair, hear the story behind the brand, hear the story behind how it was, you know, built or put together. And we started with like a 5-star type of rating thing to understand like where they are in types of like impact. But now we want to do a more thorough approach. So instead of having like 5 stars in general, having, you know, like 10 lines of like different pieces of impact that they're claiming, and where in the scale they are on each of those lines.
Amazing. So can you walk through an example of either a provider that's providing furniture or a client that's used, you know, your service, and, you know, like what's the general scope of a client? Are they doing like are they buying furniture for a room? They're doing a complete redesign, and then, you know, and then a related question is, how do you? I mean, there's net promoter score. The client says they're happy.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're thinking about a bigger ethical or impact measurement, like either where are you as a company in terms of thinking about impact, or where do you aspire to go?
Yeah. So starting with, let's say, I'm trying to remember the first part of the question. So in terms of like where we are with that, like an example of a good brand for us is this brand that's called Numi. It's in our platform, and they use wood from this tree called Wairuro. And it's a really common tree that grows in the specific region in Peru, that grows really fast too, and it's really good quality wood. So they have this like beautiful process of creating these beautiful pieces of furniture. And like they're like 2 people running, let's say, their storefront on a regular basis, and they have like their production team that's like this community that like they help promote economies, or the economy of this community. And it's really like great for us to be able to bring a brand like that onto our platform and be like, hey, we're going to be your support so that more people can reach your products, and that, you know, like your beautiful brand gets to grow and be in front of more people, because this is the type of material that we want to promote in like in general, right? In terms of like our users, like we have every scope or like size of project. So we have people that are maybe just building a nursery, and they need just like one crib or like one thing or one there, and they don't know, like right now their resources were finding something in a, you know, shopping mall, or going on Instagram and seeing if they could trust the provider or not. So if they come with it, when they come to Atelier, then they know that we're giving them the guarantee of, you know, the quality, that the crib they're going to put their newborn in is not, you know, made with toxic materials. And then that creates a beautiful story. So we can have like that type of user, and then we also have the ones that are going to create a whole room because they just moved into a new apartment, and they might have some pieces that they're bringing from their parents' house, but most of the apartment is still empty. So I love helping those type of users.
Wonderful. What, you know, in startup terms is called total addressable market.
Yeah.
And I'll just say, you know, my wife Kathleen is from Colombia, so we rented, we've moved, so we've gone through all this. And I'll say in Colombia, at least in Medellin, we have a couple of furniture stores. Most of them are crap. And then there's a few really nice ones, but they're so expensive, like beyond belief. I'm just shocked. And then there are people who build their own furniture. There's some towns outside of Medellin, but it's word of mouth. And you kind of start asking friends, and there is Instagram.
Yeah,
And so
exactly.
Catalina found these great people who do pallet furniture. So we got that for our patio, and they were great, but you don't know if they're great.
Yeah.
So it really is a kind of, and IKEA is coming to Colombia. So they're opening in Bogota this year and Medellin next year. So that'll be interesting to see.
Yeah.
But I guess, so it is really haphazard. And there's like either really cheap, horrible things, or like, one ethical question. I mean, one is if you're thinking about just green and sustainability in general, whether it's connected to Atelier or like just architecture and construction in general, there is a green premium or sustainability ethical premium.
Yeah.
And so is the idea that, I mean, everybody ideally should be using things that are sustainable, or at least not destroying the planet.
Exactly.
But is that only limited to communities or people where they can afford a premium? Like, do you have an idea in mind? I've talked to people in green construction, and a lot say it's like 10% extra cost. But you save that in the long term in the environment, and also just like, but is there an estimate if you're really going to go sustainable and local? Is it more expensive? Forgetting about like, there's the environmental impact.
Right. I mean, that's a really fair question, and something that we not just contemplate, but also like have done a lot of research on. And there's like this gap, like you mentioned, but a lot of our products also. All right, so let me try to like unscramble my brain.
Okay.
There is this like higher tier of like boutique brands, like you said, that are a little bit inaccessible in terms of like what the mid to mid high income bracket can afford, and there is like the very cheap stuff, and IKEA actually falls into that category a little bit as well. But in between, there are so many brands that, like in Peru, for instance, like you'll find like this little tiny, hole in the wall type of store that carries like vintage pieces, for instance. Or you'll find like along the highway, they have like these artisans that come and like put all of their pieces in there. So there are a lot of like, I don't know if the term is like, let's call them unofficial brands, that have that, difficulty of getting in front of consumers. So what we see is an opportunity to create an economic development out of this. So for all of those people that are like unofficially on the market but having selling, to be able to have their proper store, because everything's digital now, so they don't need to have a storefront in a shopping mall anymore. And there's really like a huge amount of brands that fall into that category across all of LATAM. Like we've estimated about 5 million brands potentially, like in like the from that tier all the way to like the high-end boutique ones. And in terms of consumers, it's interesting because, like I say, one of our paint brands, we're talking with them because they're the only ecological paint brand available right now in Peru. And we're asking them, how do you go about, reaching your target customer right now? And they're like, we started targeting the higher tier or the high-end consumer because we thought they were the only ones who could afford us. And then most of our volume came from like even to mid-low income consumers, because these are younger generations that want to spend more money knowing that they're doing the right thing. And they don't have a problem buying like one thing at a time if that's all they can afford. So we look at that, and this is something that we saw in our research as well. So if we can, scale that into the 47 million people that fall in this category of mid to mid-low or mid-high income younger generations, and even give them help in terms of like how to purchase and access these pieces. So maybe we have like payment plans or anything like that, then we're reaching a much larger market. So the TAM in terms of like, sizes is really huge, and it can like what we've estimated based on our business model is that this is a $20 billion market that we can tap into.
Across Latin America.
Yeah,
Mhm.
exactly.
And just to say, like, we think about a lot of these things, so like, a lot of paint. I mean, most people don't realize most of the furniture that's imported cheap is filled with horrible toxic chemicals, and that
Exactly.
I don't know the top proper term, but leaches over time. Most paint has high VOCs, volatile organic compounds, or whatever that is.
Yeah.
And like, if you use low VOC, or I mean, if there's no VOC, but like you're breathing in these things all the time. And so, and we have bought the cheap stuff. So, and also tried to do better. And actually in Colombia, I haven't, like in the US, we painted our kids' room with low VOC, like, as clean paint as possible. I haven't seen much of that in Colombia, but when we painted, we wanted it. So I think, and sometimes it's only 10% more, like it's not, and then if you figure the health benefits. So one question too, when you're thinking about your products, and again, we have a few more minutes if people want to ask questions or make comments. Do you see any furniture manufacturers, whether small artisan or larger, who are thinking about the complete life cycle, both of everything they source into the product, but also the expected lifespan? And then, I mean, I would say in Colombia, we're so much better at not just throwing crap away than in the US. So often it's word of mouth, or you give it away, or street recyclers. Like, so there is garbage all over the place, and landfills are a problem, but it is better than the US in terms of actual the reusing and fixing up. But have you seen any manufacturers doing that, or is that something you see in your product, that at some point, if someone's moving or wants to give it away or resell it, would there be like a secondary market within Atelier?
I love that question, because that is part of our model long term. We actually have one of our brands who has a line of refurbished secondhand furniture that they started picking up from these experiences. So kind of like finding these treasures in old homes and that they knew they were going to throw away. They pick them up, they give it a second life, and then they have this like special pop-up store to sell all of those. So that's part of our model long term as well. And once they start, buying things from us, maybe they're moving, maybe they move to another country, maybe, they're growing their house and they're going to have to get rid of things, they can sell them back to us. And we can put them back in the market after, a process of cleaning and refurbishing. And yeah, like we have this one brand that's doing that. I haven't seen it from tons of our, let's say, brands, but I know like part of our like process, and we're aiming to help these little, tiny shops that are holes in the walls that do already have, vintage pieces that they change the marble top or whatever that was, and then they can put that in the market for others to find.
When we left the US and sold everything, Catalina did a lot. We gave away so much, to charity donations, homeless shelter, or, all sorts of places, library. But she also just did a lot of stuff on Facebook, whatever you call.
Yeah,
but it's not a very effective place. And that, so I do feel like there's something like a market of how to like not just go to Facebook, because it's weird for the trust factor. So 3 more quick questions, and we'll start to wrap up. So one, you're a founder and you've been part of numerous, let's say, incubator and accelerator programs, whether it's Latitude or Invisible Hand. So for people who have a startup idea, can you talk a little bit about what these different programs have helped you do? And if someone's got an idea and they're starting to build, what do you recommend to others? Like, are these useful? I don't want you to evaluate a particular one, but like why people might consider some of these incubator or fellowship or fellows programs.
I love that question, because I actually got a lot of value from these programs in terms of like, just like, let's say, even visibility and signaling. If you're raising money from, institutions, VCs, and all of that, it's great to have another institution behind you, and that people know that you went through like their, let's call it, educational program. So that alone, it's like a great piece of value. But in terms of what you actually get from the program, I like, there's 3 things that I usually look for. Number 1 is the community, like who's the people that's involved, what can I do for them, and what they can do for me. Because in business, like, you can really make it or break it depending on who you know. So and this is not in terms of like saying like, be, like conniving or anything like that. Like I really mean about growing your own community, your own support group, and knowing who you can trust and who you can go to ask for, help when you need it. So that's like two things that I really look for in the programs, and I've gotten that from pretty much every program I've participated. So like my group from Visible Hands is like this. Like we talk to each other all the time. We're always asking each other questions like, hey, what do you send this investor? What does your financial sheet looks like? And like, hey, let's compare notes. Let's do this. Let's do that. From Latitude, like the community is a lot larger there, so it's a little harder to get into this like kind of like more type of friendship in type of relationship. But I have found a few different people from the program that I'm close to, that we check on each other once in a while, that we help each other out. We have these like coffee random chats that it connects you to someone, and each cohort is like 120 people. In that right now they have like 10 cohorts, so it's a really big network, and you randomly get connected with someone every time. So like when you get connected with that, all you can do is like offer help in some regard, and they always offer help back. So it's been great to grow your community that way. And right now we're doing the Battery, which is a program out of Berkeley, and I found the same type of support. And then the third thing that I look for in these programs is what's the actual, content that you're going to get out of it. So Latitude, I think, is great in terms of like you get a little bit of everything. So it doesn't matter what state your company is, you're always going to get a little bit of value because they have a really general, let's say, like big scope of work that they go through. So maybe some of the lessons are going to be too, early for you in terms of like you've already passed that. But some of the lessons are going to be more valuable. And then you just like, get what you can out of each program. And then like VHLX, which is a program I did with Visible Hands, was really, it nail you into the product development part of it and experiment. And so everything I told you about, like finding out like what is the solution that you're building before you build a solution, I got from that program. So these have all been really, really helpful.
Wonderful. One question about architecture in general.
Yeah.
When you went through your training as a student, did they talk about sustainability, or are you seeing any revolution, or like within architecture, is it becoming essential, or is kind of students can choose to take a class on it?
Yeah, there wasn't a lot available in terms of what the syllabus was when I was in school, but we did mention it like a bit because it was a certification that was starting to be trendy. So people were talking about, oh yeah, get LEED certified, get LEED certified. And a lot of my friends actually, when they went to do their masters or whatever, when like their postgraduate programs, they got LEED certified. In the firms where I've worked, both firms had a little bit of a sustainability aspect. Like the last firm where I worked, they had a whole department focused on that, and they were trying to educate us more in that process, and they like encourage you to get certifications in those terms as well. So I think in terms of architecture in general, like let's say the profession itself is very service oriented. So we are all kind of like just a little biased in those terms. Like we want to help in any way that we can. Most of us come into the profession to try to make some type of impact, whether that's like in a personal, a person's livelihood in their new home, or in like a whole community, like how you impact a whole city. That was more of my type of like affinity when I decided to become an architect. And I see a lot of effort. Like right now, the American Institute of Architects is actually asking all of architecture firms to go net zero, or let's call it as green as possible by 2030. So this is a big, impulse from a huge organization that's going to drive this sustainability trend into an actual standard in a market, which also puts us in a great position because everything's just going to go like domino. And all of a sudden, this cool, cute thing, like nice to have thing, that sustainability is going to be necessary for everybody because it's going to be the standard.
So how can people help Atelier? So if they're not in Latin America,
Yeah.
Or I mean, two questions. One is like, obviously, what channel is the best channel to follow you all on?
Yeah.
What kind of assistance? And then does your team have any kind of, let's say, educational content, just talking about sustainability? Like, just
Yeah.
how can people help and what's the best channel?
I love that. So you can help us two ways. You can go to our website. It's atelierApp.com. And yeah, atelier-app.com. And you can find all of our social media there. We have a blog. In our blog, we talk about, sustainability with furniture. You can also follow me on andreaorrego.com. I post a lot about this subject as well. And if you want to support us, just reach out. Our email, our social media, everything is on that website. And yeah, I'm happy to continue this conversation with anybody. Yeah.
And then last question, we always ask this: what in your spare time, not that you have that much, but are you doing any upskilling, reading an interesting book, have a favorite podcast, or watching a show that doesn't necessarily have anything to do with sustainability, but something that's making your brain happy?
My brain happy. So I am fortunate to have a 3-year-old girl who is just the light of my life. She's extremely energetic, so she takes up all of my free time. But it's, like having a kid and seeing them become a human is one of the most, transformative processes that you can go through as a parent, because you can see how every single thing that you say you do affects them and affects their behavior, which pushes you to become a better, example and try to do better for yourself. So that's really what I focus on a lot. Like any other thing I do on my free time is usually related to personal growth. And my daughter is just like the one that makes it happen no matter what.
We have a 12-year-old. Every age is different now. He's a super competitive soccer player, so it's like football all the time. But one of my favorite books we used to gift to a lot of people when he was a kid was we gave him a whole bunch of meditation books and how to deal with anger. And there was one, Mindful Monkey Happy Panda, which I don't know, and we gave it to a bunch of friends who had kids, just like the importance of just being present. So thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to share this really cool business you're developing, a little bit on your life, and also recommendations for others who are crazy enough to do startups or not. So again, this will be converted to a podcast episode and on our platform in all places in about 3 weeks. For anyone listening in the future, please rate the podcast, check out Atelier App, follow Andrea. And when you said that to follow you, was that Instagram or I posted Atelier App, but is it Instagram the best channel or LinkedIn just to follow you?
Both. You can, and actually even Twitter. I'm most active on Twitter, so you can find my socials on andreaorrego.com. And all of the Atelier for socials on Atelier.
And last question, in terms of Atelier, right now you're live in the market in Peru.
That's right.
And any other countries or that's coming?
Yeah, so Peru is our pilot, and we'll start expanding through LATAM here next year.
Okay, thank you so much. Have a wonderful morning. Thank you everyone for listening from all over, and have a great day.
Thank you.